In this video, we're going to learn about form parameters, and that allows us to take our first look at watching post requests and seeing the posts propagate these parameters from a form on a page or a view into our servlet or from a servlet to another servlet. So what we're going to examine is how we can get the different form attributes and work with them in our servlets and continue to propagate them on. But before we get started with that, I want to take just a brief moment to tell you that I've installed a program called Fiddler on my machine. Now, Fiddler is an easy program to use. It's free, so you can go and download it. And what Fiddler does is allows us to watch web requests as they happen, so we can see the different various gets and posts and see that happen. And so it's a very good tool to have if you're going to be doing a lot of web development, especially if you're going to start doing some JavaScript stuff where you need to send some information. You can watch some of these requests going across the wire and make sure that things are happening as they go. What I want to do real quick is just show you Fiddler in action. So Fiddler is running on my machine right now. I'll just have the Hello World servlet that we've built before, and we're going to go ahead and just start this up and run it. We'll just run on our server here and restart our server if it's already running. And what we'll see is that as this happens, you'll see things happening here. And it looks like my server didn't start correctly. Oh, it didn't go anywhere. There's no page. So I want just to go into my source here real quick, and I'll just actually restart on that Hello World servlet so I don't have to type it all. But there you can see it actually happened. It went across the web. We look at the raw, we can see that here's all the get information, and here's the different URL that it posted to. And of course, if there were any parameters, we'd see them along the way, and you can see what it got back. You can see that it says Hello World Servlet, etc. So you can see that Fiddler is a very nice program that allows us to easily watch what's happening on our machine, behind the scenes even, as we're running servers and having things post back and forth. It basically captures all of our web traffic, and it allows us to see what's going on. So for this video, the next part that we're going to do is we're going to actually work with some code that's already in place. What we need to do is get some resource files. So the resource files that we want to take a look at are the City Manager Web Starter and the City Manager Web Complete. Now, I'm going to go ahead and work with the complete in this video just to save us time, so you don't have to watch me typing everything. But essentially, the City Manager Web Starter will be everything except for the main menu responder servlet that we're going to actually look at that handles the posting information in this. So I'm going to go ahead and import City Manager Web Complete, but you should start with Starter and try to build the complete version. So you might have them both open or look at the code in both and compare and see what's going on. So you can see the difference between not having the post respond and how we actually did that, and maybe practice working with it. One thing to note, when we import these, we will need to rename them because the system is expecting just City Manager Web. So if you're running it, it won't propagate to the right URLs without being pointed to the right information. So what we want to do is import the one that we want. So City Manager Web Complete, it's a WAR file under Web. And I'm going to browse to it here on my machine, and that's the City Manager Web Complete that I want to look at. And of course, on my Tomcat 7, I'm just going to go ahead and finish. There's no libraries to add. Again, I need to refactor this right away before I forget and rename this just to City Manager Web so that the URLs will go where they're expecting to go. Now let's just take a look at the code in the system so that we can see all this in action. So we have 4 web pages in our web content folder. We'll start with index. Index is going to be our starting page where we land. So you can see right away here in the HTML, we have a form ID, and this form is going to have a method post, and this action is going to be City Manager Web /main-menu-responder.do. So main-menu-responder.do is going to be our servlet that we're going to post to. So this will give us a chance to actually do some posting. And you can see again that that URL is City Manager Web. So if you're in City Manager Web Starter, you might need to rename this here or refactor your project if you haven't already. All this is going to do is essentially ask the user what they'd like to do. What we'll really want to note is these names for our different items. So our select is going to have the name menu choice, and the choice will have values 1, 2, and 3. You can see the different values, and each value will represent an option that the user could do. So what we're going to do is pass variables, and what their values are is going to be important. And here we have another one that's going to be our checkbox, and that's going to be called admin options. You can see that both of these are admin options, which means that these checkboxes are going to come in an array, and each one will have different values if they're selected. They'll actually show up in the array. If they're not selected, the array would be completely null. And so that allows us to propagate those values across on the post. So those will be the different variables that we'll pass across the web. Add city, it's not going to do anything other than give the user an option to add and actually then give a text box, but there's nothing to post at that point. Delete city, all we're just going to tell them is that we're deleting, and list cities is just going to list out a few static cities. We're not actually doing anything with the database at this point. So those pages are pretty worthless. We're just using them mostly to see things coming across the web and watching it. What's really important is in our servlet, the city main menu responder. Because we're doing a post now, we need to put our code in the doPost method. If you put it in the doGet method, which you're used to doing, what would happen is you would post to this servlet and nothing would happen because your code would actually not be hit if it's in the doGet method. So it's important to note which one you're in. So let's take a real quick look at the code. And again, if you wanted to start with the starter program, you would have no code in this and you could then practice doing some of this stuff. But what's important is to note that we have some different options that we're going to be looking at. First of all, because the menu choice was a single option, we can read that into a string. So we just use getParameter, and getParameter reads a single parameter with a single name into that user choice string, and it will read in the value, which would be 1, 2, or 3, based on what the user chose. And here we have user options, which is an array, and this is going to be returned by getting the parameter values from the request. And that again is that admin options, and that lines up with the names of the different checkboxes. So you can see multiple admin options selected, no admin options selected will come into this array called user options. And what we're going to do is just quickly build a parameter string based on what was passed to this servlet to propagate on through the system so we can see the form values going into the query string and continuing on across the system in a way that we could use them. So what we have here is a string builder that's just going to be used to build a new query string, and then ultimately we'll put that into query string params. So if the user options is null, that means they didn't select either checkbox. We don't need to do anything for our query string params. We're going to take whatever choice they did and send them to a specific page, but we're only going to propagate variables if they've actually selected something. If it is that they have selected something, the first time we need to append a question mark. If you're not familiar with query string parameters, it essentially is the URL, and then as you add parameters, the first parameter before that you have a question mark, and then you have name equals value, and then for every additional parameter after the first one, you use an ampersand to concatenate the next one. You would say ampersand name equals value, ampersand name equals value, as many times as you need to pass these variables along the web. And then we have our user options. So if they've selected to use the database, let's go ahead and add useDB equals 1. If they said send email equals 1. That just allows us to propagate that, and we'll build this query string then, useDB equals 1, send email equals 1, or some various combination of that, or none at all. And of course, at the end, we'll concatenate that all together by getting the toString and having the query string params be our result that we'll just add to our URL. So before we would have printed things out to the screen, what we're going to do now is actually forward on to another page or another servlet. So this is going to be a page that we're forwarding on to. So if they've chosen that they want to list the cities, we'll send them to list cities and add the query string params. If they've chosen they want to add a city, we'll send them to add city and we'll pass on these params. And if they want to delete, we'll do the same thing for delete. If they have somehow gotten here with an invalid choice, we can actually just send them back to the index and make them re-choose. And that basically wraps up the code for our servlet, and that gives us the chance now to see this post in action. So let's go ahead and start up on index, and let's go ahead and run our server. And we'll have to restart if we're running. Let's pretend they wanted to add and they wanted to use the database and send a confirmation. We can choose that. You can see that we got to the new page. What you can also see is that we did propagate our useDB equals 1 and send email equals 1. Let's go back one more time and let's just list the cities and only do a send confirmation for whatever reason. And we'll choose that and you can see that that's propagated. So what you can see is that as we've posted, we hit the servlet handled the parameters as we expected and redirected the user to the correct page based on their choice. But what's really neat is watching this happen in our Fiddler. So you can see if we go back to Fiddler here, you can actually watch your requests happening. So here we made a post. We posted to main menu responder.do. And we actually had the parameters menu choice equals 2, admin options equals useDB, admin options equals send email, and chooser equals choose. So you can see that those were propagated behind the scenes into our servlet, and then our servlet was able to go ahead and forward us on or redirect us on with a GET request to the addcity.html, and it propagated those parameters as expected. Same thing here. When we came in the second time, we wanted to list the cities, and we only had send email. So you can see that those were already propagated on our post as well.